I wish I could feel your hands on me again. Those were the last words I typed before hitting send. My heart pounded as I glanced across our living room at Richard, my husband of 18 years, completely absorbed in his newspaper. I was sitting right there, just 15 feet away, when I sent that message to another man. And 30 minutes later, those same words would come back to haunt me in the most devastating way possible. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 47 years old, with 2 kids in college, and what everyone thought was a picture-perfect marriage. Richard and I met in our late 20s, built a beautiful home in the suburbs, and created what looked like the ideal life. I worked as an interior designer while Richard climbed the corporate ladder. From the outside, we had it all: the house, the careers, the kids, the stability. But behind closed doors, our marriage had become an empty shell. What started as a passionate relationship had gradually faded into a polite coexistence. For the past 3 years, our bedroom had transformed from a place of intimacy to just another room in the house. At first, it happened occasionally. Richard would be too tired or too stressed from work. I understood. We were both busy, both exhausted. But weeks turned into months, and soon, I couldn't remember the last time he had reached for me in the dark. It's just a phase, I told myself. It'll pass when work calms down. But work never calmed down, and the excuses multiplied. My back is acting up. I have an early meeting tomorrow. Maybe this weekend. Always deflection, always tomorrow. I tried everything I could think of. New lingerie that stayed folded in my drawer, romantic dinners that ended with a kiss on the cheek and him falling asleep watching TV, weekend getaways where we did everything except connect physically. The more I tried, the more I felt like I was pressuring him, and the more he withdrew. "Do you still find me attractive?" I finally asked one night, fighting back tears. "Of course I do," Richard said, looking genuinely confused. "Why would you ask that?" "Because you never touch me anymore, Richard. We haven't made love in months." He sighed, running his hand through his graying hair. "It's not you, Sarah. I'm just under a lot of pressure at work. The merger is taking everything out of me. Always work, always stress, always anything but the truth." I suggested therapy, both couples and individual. Richard agreed to go, but after 3 sessions, he stopped. "I don't have time to talk about my feelings for an hour every week," he said, "and I don't see how it helps." Meanwhile, I was withering inside. At 47, I still felt young, still desired connection and passion. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see an old woman. My body had changed, yes, but I took care of myself. I still turned heads when I dressed up, but not his. Never his anymore. The silence of rejection is deafening. It's not just about sex. It's about feeling wanted, desirable, alive. Each night that passed with nothing more than a peck on the cheek chipped away at my self-esteem. I started to wonder if this was just what happened in long marriages. Was this normal? Was I asking for too much to want passion after 18 years? I confided in my closest friend, Jennifer. "Have you asked him to see a doctor?" she suggested. "Maybe there's a medical reason." I had delicately. Richard dismissed the idea immediately. "There's nothing wrong with me," he'd said defensively. "It's just stress. It'll pass." But it didn't pass. And after 3 years of emotional drought, of feeling invisible in my own marriage, I met David at a charity event I had helped organize. He was a donor, recently divorced, and he looked at me the way Richard used to, like I was the only woman in the room. If you're enjoying this story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. In the comments, tell me, have you ever felt invisible in a relationship? I didn't plan for anything to happen with David. The first time we talked, it was strictly professional. I thanked him for his donation, and we chatted about the charity's mission. But there was something in the way he focused on me, really listened when I spoke, that made me feel seen for the first time in years. We exchanged business cards. He had a development company, and thought my interior design services might be useful for his new projects. Perfectly innocent, perfectly professional. A week later, he emailed me about a potential project. We met for coffee to discuss it. Just coffee, just business. But our conversation drifted from color schemes and furniture to books we loved, places we'd traveled, dreams we still had. "You have incredible taste," he said, and the compliment warmed me in a way I hadn't felt in too long. The project consultation turned into lunch, which stretched into 3 hours of conversation. When I got home that evening, Richard barely looked up from his laptop to ask how my day was. I told him about the potential new client, and he nodded absently, already back to his emails. David and I began texting about the project, then about other things. His messages became the bright spot in my day. For weeks, it was nothing more than that. Messages that made me smile, made me feel interesting, attractive, alive again. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. 3 years of emotional starvation had left me vulnerable, desperate for connection. The texts turned flirtatious, then explicit. I tried one last time with Richard first. One night, after a glass of wine for courage, I approached him directly. "Richard, we need to talk about our intimacy issues," I said, sitting beside him on the couch. He sighed heavily. "Not this again, Sarah." "Yes, this again. We haven't had sex in almost 8 months this time. Before that, it was sporadic at best. That's not normal for a marriage." "Not every marriage revolves around sex," he said defensively. "We have a good life together." "A good life without physical connection isn't enough for me," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm only 47. Are we just done with that part of our relationship forever?" Richard ran his hand over his face. "I'm tired all the time, Sarah. The pressure at work. It's been 3 years, Richard. It's not just work." He stood up abruptly. "I don't want to talk about this right now," he said, and left the room. That night, I cried silently in our bathroom. It wasn't just rejection. It was the refusal to even acknowledge there was a problem. The next day, when David texted asking to meet, I said yes. I told myself it would just be lunch, just talking. But I dressed carefully, wore perfume, felt my heart race when I saw him waiting at the restaurant. 2 hours later, we were in his condo, and for the first time in years, I felt desired, beautiful, alive in my own skin again. Afterward, the guilt was overwhelming. I sat on the edge of his bed, tears streaming down my face. "I've never done anything like this before," I whispered. "I know," he said, gently touching my shoulder. "Neither have I." I didn't believe him, but I wanted to. I wanted to believe this wasn't just a conquest for him, that what we'd shared had meaning. "I should go," I said, gathering my clothes. Back in my car, I stared at myself in the rearview mirror. Who was this woman? I'd been faithful for 18 years. I'd taken vows I believed in. And yet, here I was, betraying the man I had built a life with. But I couldn't bring myself to regret it entirely. For those few hours, I had remembered what it felt like to be wanted, to be touched with passion rather than obligation or routine. The emotional connection had been even more intoxicating than the physical one. The affair continued for 6 weeks. David and I met once, sometimes twice a week, always under the guise of the project we were supposedly working on. Richard never questioned my absences. He was too absorbed in his own world to notice the changes in me, the renewed attention to my appearance, the slight smile when my phone buzzed with a message. "Do you think he suspects?" David asked once. "No," I said with sad certainty. "He'd have to look at me to suspect anything." The guilt never fully disappeared, but it competed with a new sense of being alive again. I compartmentalized my life, wife and mother in one box, lover in another. I told myself I wasn't hurting Richard if he never knew. I told myself I deserved this bit of happiness after years of neglect. Until that day, That terrible, life-changing day when I got careless. Leave your like if you understand her side, and stay until the end because the story is about to take an unexpected turn. Living a double life is exhausting. The constant vigilance, the careful management of time and alibis, the mental gymnastics required to justify your actions to yourself. It all takes a toll. David and I settled into a pattern. Tuesdays and Thursdays, sometimes a weekend afternoon if Richard was golfing with clients. Always at his place, never in public where we might be seen. Our physical connection was intense, but it was the emotional intimacy that kept me coming back. David asked about my day and actually listened to the answer. He noticed when I changed my hair. He remembered things I told him weeks earlier. "You're incredible," he'd say, tracing his fingers along my skin. "How can your husband not see that?" I didn't have an answer. The question haunted me. How had Richard and I drifted so far apart? There had been a time when he couldn't keep his hands off me, when we'd spend entire weekends in bed, emerging only for food and water. When had that changed? And why hadn't I fought harder to prevent it? At home, I made one more attempt to reconnect with Richard. I booked a weekend at the Vineyard where we'd spent our 5th anniversary. He seemed surprised, but agreed to go. "It'll be good to get away together," he said. And for the first time in ages, I felt a flicker of hope. The Vineyard was just as beautiful as I remembered. Rolling hills covered in grapevines, luxurious rooms with 4-poster beds, exquisite food and wine. It should have been the perfect setting for reconnection. On our first night, after an amazing dinner and a bottle of wine, I reached for him in our room. For a moment, he responded, and my heart soared. But then, like so many times before, he pulled away. "I'm sorry," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I guess I had too much wine." I felt the familiar sting of rejection, but this time it was compounded by comparison. David never had too much wine. David never turned away from my touch. "Richard, please," I said, fighting back tears. "Talk to me. What's really going on?" "Nothing's going on," he said, defensive as always. "I'm just tired." "For 3 years? You've been just tired for 3 years?" He got out of bed and went to stare out the window. "What do you want me to say, Sarah?" "The truth. Is it me? Are you not attracted to me anymore?" "Of course it's not you," he said, his voice strained. "You're beautiful. You've always been beautiful." "Then what? Are you having an affair?" He turned to me, genuinely shocked. "What? No, how could you think that?" "What am I supposed to think? My husband hasn't touched me in months." "Something is wrong, and you refuse to talk about it." Richard ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. "Can we just enjoy our weekend without turning it into a therapy session?" I gave up. We spent the rest of the weekend sightseeing, wine tasting, making small talk, like polite strangers rather than husband and wife. The physical and emotional gulf between us felt wider than ever. Back home, I fell deeper into my relationship with David. The contrast between my two lives became increasingly stark. With David, I felt alive, desired, valued. With Richard, I felt like a roommate, a business partner in the enterprise of running our household. The guilt began to transform into resentment. I resented Richard for his years of rejection, for his refusal to address our issues, for forcing me to look elsewhere for connection. And I resented myself for not being brave enough to either fix our marriage or end it cleanly before starting something with David. One Thursday afternoon, I almost got caught. I came home from David's to find Richard had left work early with a migraine. He was upstairs in our bedroom, the door closed, but his car in the driveway gave me a moment of pure panic. "Where were you?" he asked when I checked on him, his voice muffled by the pillow over his head. "Client meeting," I said, the lie coming easily now. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone's driving an ice pick through my skull," he groaned. Can you get me some water and my medication? As I cared for him, bringing medicine, closing blinds, speaking in hushed tones, I felt a confusing mix of emotions: concern for his pain, guilt about my deception, relief that he hadn't questioned my absence, and underneath it all, a deep sadness at how far we'd drifted from the loving couple we once were. Later that night, as Richard slept off his migraine, I sat alone in our kitchen questioning everything. What was I doing? Where was this headed? I couldn't keep living this double life indefinitely. Eventually, something would have to give. David had begun talking about feelings, about a future. Leave him, he'd suggested the day before, tracing patterns on my bare back as we lay in his bed. We could be together for real. The suggestion both thrilled and terrified me. Could I really blow up my marriage, my family, my entire life? What would our children think? Our friends? Was what David and I had real enough, substantial enough to build a new life on? Or was it just the intoxication of desire and novelty? And what about Richard? Despite everything, I still cared for him. We'd built a life together. We had history, children, memories. Did I really want to throw all that away? But could I go back to a marriage without passion, without true intimacy? After remembering what it felt like to be desired, could I accept its absence again? I had no answers, only questions that kept me awake long into the night. Are you understanding the complexity of this situation? Share this video with someone who needs this honest conversation. It happened on a Tuesday, an ordinary Tuesday that would change everything. David and I had been texting all morning. He had an evening free and wanted me to come over. I was sitting in our living room, Richard across from me reading the newspaper, when the messages turned explicit. There was something particularly thrilling about sitting there, my husband just feet away, while another man described what he wanted to do to me later. I wish I could feel your hands on me again, I typed, my pulse quickening. It's been too long since you touched me. I hit send and then put my phone face down on the coffee table, trying to look casual as I picked up a magazine. Richard glanced up briefly, then returned to his paper. Normal. Routine. Safe. Then Richard's phone rang. He answered, discussed something about a meeting, and hung up. I need to go into the office, he said, already standing. Crisis with the Henderson account. I shouldn't be more than a couple of hours. Of course, I said, thinking of David's invitation. This was perfect timing. I could see David earlier than planned. Richard gathered his keys and wallet, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and left. I immediately texted David that I could come over now. His response came quickly. Perfect. Can't wait to see you. I went upstairs to shower and change. I chose carefully. The black lace bra that David loved. The perfume he had complimented. I was just applying my lipstick when I realized I'd left my phone downstairs. When I came down to retrieve it, I froze. The coffee table was empty. My phone was gone. A spike of panic shot through me. Had I moved it without thinking? I looked under the magazines, behind the cushions. Nothing. Then I realized Richard must have picked it up by mistake. We had the same model, same case. It had happened once before. I called his phone from our landline. No answer. I tried his office direct line. His assistant said he hadn't arrived yet. Panic gave way to full-blown terror. What if he unlocked my phone? What if he saw the messages? Richard and I knew each other's passcodes, a transparency we'd maintained throughout our marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me. I paced the living room, my mind racing. Maybe he wouldn't check the phone. Maybe he wouldn't notice it wasn't his. Maybe he'd just put it in his pocket and drive to work. But 30 minutes later, I heard his car in the driveway. My heart nearly stopped. Richard walked in, his face a mask I couldn't read. In his hand was my phone. You forgot this, he said, his voice eerily calm as he placed it on the table. I couldn't breathe. Richard, He held up his hand. Let me speak first. He sat down heavily in his chair, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I opened your phone thinking it was mine. I was going to email myself a document. He paused, his eyes finally meeting mine. And I saw the messages, Sarah. The room seemed to spin. This was it. The moment I'd feared. The consequences I'd been avoiding. It wasn't hard to figure out what's been going on, he continued. How long? I sank onto the couch, my legs unable to support me. 6 weeks, I whispered. Richard nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already calculated. Who is he? A client. Former client now, I said, my voice barely audible. His name is David. Do you love him? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and awful. No, I said, and realized it was true. No, it's not about love. Then what is it about, Sarah? What could possibly be worth throwing away 18 years of marriage? His voice cracked on the last word, and the sound broke something in me. It's about feeling wanted, I said, tears spilling down my cheeks. It's about being touched, being desired. It's about not feeling invisible in my own marriage. What are you talking about? Richard asked, genuine confusion in his voice. The dam broke. 3 years of frustration, rejection, and loneliness came pouring out. We haven't had sex in 8 months, Richard. Before that, it was spotty at best. I've tried everything. New clothes, weekends away, talks, therapy. You always have an excuse. You're tired. You're stressed. You have a headache. Do you have any idea what that does to a woman? To be constantly rejected by her own husband. To wonder what's wrong with her. Richard's face went through a series of emotions. Shock. Confusion. Then something that looked like shame. He stared at the floor for a long moment. There's nothing wrong with you, Sarah, he finally said, his voice low. Then what is it? Are you not attracted to me anymore? Is there someone else? No, God, no. He stood up abruptly, pacing the room. It's not you, it's... He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. It's what, Richard? After what you just discovered, don't you think you owe me the truth? He turned to look at me, and the pain in his eyes took me aback. I can't. He started, then stopped. I can't perform anymore, he finally said, the words coming out strained, as if physically painful to pronounce. I stared at him, processing. You mean? Yes, he said sharply. Erectile dysfunction, impotence, whatever you want to call it. I can't get an erection, or if I do, I can't maintain it. It started happening occasionally a few years ago, then more frequently. Now it's consistent. The last word came out bitter, defeated. I felt like I'd been hit by a wave, disoriented and struggling to find my footing. Why didn't you tell me? How could I? He asked, his voice rising. How do you tell your wife that you're not a man anymore? That you can't do the most basic thing a husband should be able to do? That's not, Richard, that doesn't make you less of a man, doesn't it? He laughed bitterly. You found another man who could do what I can't. Seems pretty defining to me. The truth of his words stung, but I pushed on. Did you see a doctor? There are treatments, medications. Of course I did, he interrupted. About 2 years ago, I tried Viagra. It didn't work well for me, gave me headaches and only worked about half the time. The doctor suggested injections or a pump. He shuddered. Do you know how that made me feel? The thought of needing a shot or a device just to make love to my wife. So you just gave up? I asked incredulously. Without telling me? Without giving me any say in the matter? I was ashamed, Sarah. I couldn't bear for you to look at me differently, to see me as broken. So instead, you let me think I was the problem? That I wasn't attractive enough? Desirable enough? That there was something wrong with me? Anger began to replace shock. Do you have any idea what that did to me? How that destroyed my self-esteem, My sense of worth? Richard looked genuinely stunned. I never thought... I was trying to protect myself, I guess. I thought if I just avoided the situation, maybe it would get better on its own. For 3 years? I stood now, my own anger building. For 3 years you let me think I was undesirable rather than tell me the truth? Rather than work with me to find solutions? I was wrong, he admitted, his voice breaking. I was a coward. I was ashamed, and I handled it terribly. We stood facing each other, the full weight of our failures hanging between us. His secret, my betrayal, years of poor communication and missed chances to be honest with each other. What happens now? He asked quietly. I shook my head, tears flowing freely. I don't know, Richard. I honestly don't know. 6 months have passed since that devastating Tuesday. 6 months of confronting hard truths, making difficult decisions, and trying to rebuild what we'd broken, or perhaps what we'd allowed to decay through neglect. The weeks following Richard's revelation and my confession were brutal. We circled each other like wounded animals, both hurt, both angry, both unsure if our marriage could or should be saved. I ended things with David immediately. He didn't take it well, accusing me of using him, of never intending to leave Richard. Perhaps there was some truth in that. Perhaps I had used him as a band-aid for my wounded self-esteem. It wasn't my proudest realization. Richard and I agreed to try therapy again, both couples and individual. This time he committed fully. No more skipped sessions, no more half-hearted participation. In his individual therapy, he began working through his shame and how it had led him to withdraw rather than face vulnerability. In my sessions, I confronted the choices I'd made and the damage they'd caused. In our joint sessions, we learned to communicate in ways we never had before. Hard as it was to admit, we realized we'd both been poor communicators throughout our marriage, not just during this crisis. We'd both made assumptions, avoided difficult conversations, prioritized peace over honesty. Richard also returned to his doctor, this time with me by his side. We learned that his erectile dysfunction was partly physical, early signs of cardiovascular issues that needed addressing, and partly psychological, the anxiety about performance creating a vicious cycle of failure and more anxiety. This is common in men your age, the urologist assured us. And there are multiple approaches we can take. He outlined options, different medications, therapy specifically for sexual issues, lifestyle changes that could improve blood flow. And there's more to intimacy than penetrative sex, the sex therapist we began seeing reminded us. You've both been defining your intimate life too narrowly. It was a difficult journey. There were nights of tears, days of lingering resentment. Moments when I wasn't sure forgiveness was possible, from either side. Richard struggled to trust me again. I struggled to forgive his years of deception by omission. We both had to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our marriage. But slowly, gradually, we began to rebuild. We instituted weekly date nights, no phones, no distractions, just us reconnecting as people, not just as parents or partners in running a household. We started exercising together, cooking healthy meals, addressing the physical health issues that had contributed to Richard's condition. And we relearned intimacy, all forms of it, not just sexual. We held hands more. We touched casually throughout the day. We kissed properly, not the perfunctory pecks we'd fallen into. We learned to pleasure each other in ways that didn't rely on erections, rediscovering sensuality beyond the narrow definitions we'd accepted. Richard's condition improved with treatment, not miraculously or immediately, but steadily. The medical interventions helped, but so did the reduction in performance anxiety once everything was in the open. Once he didn't have to pretend anymore. Once we could approach our intimate life as a team rather than adversaries. Today, our marriage is different. Not perfect. I don't believe in perfect marriages anymore, but stronger in some ways. We're more honest with each other, more intentional about nurturing our connection, more aware of how easily things can slip away if neglected. The betrayal remains a painful chapter in our history. Trust, once broken, takes a long time to rebuild. There are still moments when Richard looks at me with a shadow of doubt, when the specter of my affair rises between us. There are still moments when I feel a flare of resentment over the years of rejection and his refusal to be honest about what was happening. But we've chosen to move forward together, to learn from our mistakes rather than be defined by them. We've chosen to believe that 18 years of history, of building a life together, of raising children and weathering life's storms, is worth fighting for. The most important lesson I've learned through all of this is that silence is poison in a marriage. The things we don't say, the truths we hide, from our partners or from ourselves, eventually surface in destructive ways. Richard's inability to face his medical issue and his masculine identity crisis led to years of rejection that damaged my self-worth. My unwillingness to confront the problem head-on, to demand answers or make difficult choices, led me to betray the man I'd promised to love faithfully. For men struggling with erectile dysfunction, I wish I could tell them all. It doesn't define you. It doesn't make you less of a man, and hiding it from your partner only compounds the problem, creating distance where you need closeness most. There are treatments, there are solutions, and there are ways to maintain intimacy, even when things aren't working perfectly. For women feeling rejected and invisible in their marriages, I would say, demand the truth, even when it's difficult. Don't allow yourself to believe you're undesirable, unworthy of attention. And make choices you can live with, that align with your values, even when your needs aren't being met. And for all couples, I would say this: talk, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. The conversations you're avoiding are probably the ones you need most. Be vulnerable with each other. Be honest about your needs, your fears, your insecurities. Don't let shame dictate your actions. And remember that true intimacy isn't just physical. It's being fully known and fully accepted by another person. Our story isn't over. We're still writing it, day by day, choice by choice. I don't know what the next chapter holds, but I know we're facing it together. Eyes open. No more secrets between us. And you? What do you think about this situation? Was she wrong? Did he share the blame? Tell me in the comments without judgment. If this story made you reflect, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more real and honest stories about relationships. And tell me, do you have the courage to share this video?